Good afternoon. My name is Mike Becker. I'm the Legislative and Policy Director for the Clean Elections Commission. It is a pleasure for me to welcome Arizona's own data guru, Garrett Archer. He's here to talk about elections projections. Garrett, it's all yours.
Oh, thank you. Hello. Hello. My name is Garrett Archer. I am the elections and data analyst for ABC 15. I'm kind of a weird unicorn in politics. I went a different route than most people. I started as a political hack and then moved to government, and I worked at the Secretary of State's office from 2016 to 2018. And then now I work in journalism. So usually that path is slightly reversed, and I went the other way. So it's been an interesting experience. So what I'm going to talk about today are the projections for the 2020 election. Now, the way I'm just going to preface this, the way that I kind of go about this is we're going to talk first about, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about how we got here. Arizona is definitely a battleground state this year. No one is disputing that. And several years ago, it was not a battleground state. In fact, 2012, Mitt Romney carried the state from Barack Obama by about 10 points, and it was approximate to that in prior elections. So we've gone from a pretty reliably Republican state to definitely a swing state, and that has a lot to do with one of my primary focuses, which is the urban-rural divide. Arizona being a state with this very, very large county, Maricopa County, where we're all sitting right now, encompassing about 62% of the vote, and then a somewhat smaller urban county to the south, and then the remainder of the state is rural counties. So, and that plays a big part of the narrative as to why we have become a battleground state. So there's my lovely titles page. My presentations are a little Spartan, so I do like white backgrounds and tables, just kind of, articulates it the best. So like what I just spoke about, in 2012, as you can see, Mitt Romney beat Barack Obama by 9 points. You fast forward to 2016, and Donald Trump only beat Hillary Clinton by 3.5 points. So one of the interesting things, as you can see in this table, is that the Democratic performance actually didn't increase all that much from 2012 to 2016. In fact, Hillary Clinton only got about a point more than Barack Obama did the year prior. Most of Donald Trump's weakness or his the drop in his vote totals came from people abandoning the Republicans for one of the third-party candidates. There was Evan Mcmullen, I believe his name was. I apologize if I get that name wrong. And he carried about 110,000 votes here. So there was a lot of abandonment there. And it's what we don't know is, does that abandonment remain without a third-party candidate on the board, or does it shift to the Democrats, or does it go back to the Republicans? That's going to be the biggest question for Republicans as we go forward. Now, the next table below that is the composition. So think of this as a pie chart. Each of those years, think of them as their own separate pie chart. So as you can see, the 2012 composition was the party split, which is the difference between the Republicans and the Democrats that participated in that election, was a 9-point favorability for Republicans. Wow, it really matches that that 2012 election results. So 2016, a presidential year, typically presidential years in all cases, going back quite some time, have a much lower party split between the Republicans and Democrats. That is a function of more independents showing up to vote in a presidential year than they do in a midterm. And so what you saw this was one of the most narrow party splits in a presidential election, which was 6.7 points in favor of the Republicans. But 2018, a midterm year where that party split should have gone back in favor of the Republicans even more so, it actually narrowed by 1/10 of a point. And that is at least on record that we can find, the most narrow party split between the Republicans and Democrats, what happened just this last year. And again, the question on everyone's mind is 2018 an anomaly, or does the party split continue to narrow in favor of the Democrats, or does it slightly widen for the Republicans? And that's going to be a factor of course, turnout, energy from both sides, things that are somewhat non-quantifiable that happen in elections where, parties have to go out and register voters and campaign and go door to door and a lot of that stuff. So we will absolutely see. So, and as I said, one of the biggest factors in that party split and is going to be the voter registration composition. And what you see here, normally that is always a little more narrow because there's, in this state, it's Republicans, Independents, and then Democrats. So the party split in 2012 was 5.4. In 2016, it was 4.1. It kind of widened a little bit to 4.6. So again, does that narrow? And in midterm years, in off years especially, we don't see a lot of action in voter registration because people aren't going out to register to vote. People are moving out of state. People aren't thinking about it, so they're not updating their voter registration. So a lot of people drop off the registration rolls. And what we see is that usually inordinately affects Democrats and Independents, younger Democrats and Independents, because most of those are college students. So they drop off the rolls. The split between the Republicans and the Democrats widens again, and then it should, if it follows normal patterns in 2020, once the parties both start to engage in voter registration efforts, it should start to narrow again as, this newer crop of, look what I just did. Okay. I'm trying to hold this at the same time, it's just not working. So, where was I? Okay, I'll just go to the map. So this is talking about the urban-rural divide that I was just talking about. So what we're looking at here is a map of the counties from 2009 to 2019, the voter registration changes. This is for the Republicans. And what you see here is the darker the county, the higher percentage change. And so we're looking at Apache County and Mojave County, and this kind of swath right here in the middle where it goes from Mojave, Yavapai, Gila, down to Graham County, and then up through those other northern counties, there's been a lot of growth in registration for Republicans. Those are all very rural counties. Maricopa County, there was about a 12-point registration increase over the last 10 years for Republicans, but really their growth came in places like these, and then also Pinal County, which, as we'll talk about a little later, is becoming a suburban county, but it's a suburban county that is demographically typically favors Republicans at this time.
It is. Sorry about that. I can barely read it.
25%.
Right?
Yeah, 25%. So then we go to the Democrats, and what we see with the Democrats is a somewhat even more interesting picture. I had to put a negative. I had to put a split between the colors for the Democrats because they actually lost registration in Mojave, Gila, Graham, and Greenlee. These are all very rural counties, and the Democrats dropped in the last 10 years, they've actually dropped the registration by 45% in those counties. So they have definitely cratered in the rural counties, but they've made up for it in Maricopa County, where they increased 16% in the last 10 years. So they've actually increased at a higher rate than Republicans in Maricopa County, but have also lost in the rural counties. That same swath that the Republicans gained, they gained at the expense of the Democrats because they've actually lost that. And a lot of that has to do with kind of something that is a terminology in politics called ancestral Dem counties. We've seen a lot of ancestrally Dem counties and that usually only applies to rural counties, and we do have those here. And these, especially those southern counties right there, Gila and Graham, were once ancestrally Dem, and they've kind of reverted to Republican counties in the last couple cycles. And just to show the independents, this is what it would look like if it was more of an organic percentage growth, because independents are not usually, they're somewhat less ideological in some cases. I'll go through that again, but you can see here, not a lot of growth. This more just follows the patterns of migration than anything else. More people moving into Maricopa and Pinal. Greenlee is a anomaly there with its dark green, but Greenlee is also an extremely small county, so that it tends to be anomalous when it comes to statistics. So the migration patterns. One of the interesting things as to why we become a battleground state is because we pick up approximately an equal amount of people coming from states that are quote unquote favorable to Republicans that we do from states that are quote unquote favorable to Democrats. So as you can see in the coastal West, California mostly, 85,000 people over the last couple of years migrated from California to Arizona. But then you see that is somewhat equalized by Rust Belt states, which picked up about 77.5. And then in the Midwest, also states that are typically favorable to Republicans, under the 30,000. So What that looks like on a map is this, but you see in that little pie chart right there, you see the red and the blue, which is, states that favor Republicans and Democrats. It kind of meets in the middle. So, we've got this situation where we're as far as the makeup of the person coming here, of course, I don't know if that person is a Democrat or a Republican. You presume that they are proportionally what they are from those states that are coming in. And that's why we have something like this. So the number of votes cast by ethnicity, that's another thing that's happening in Arizona, is that our electorate is diversifying. This graph represents by the Census Bureau, the number of votes cast from 2006 to 2018. That line on top, the blue line, is the white non-Hispanic. And you see it's somewhat stagnant. It's kind of remained consistent throughout the entire, from 2006. But the other lines, which represent Hispanics and Black and Asian populations, have started to tick up a little bit. And the biggest question, of course, in Arizona is that Hispanic number. That's always been a wild card here. You'll see in the media, usually when we get close to an election season, there'll be media reports on, will Hispanics start to show up and vote in this election? Hispanics typically in Arizona vote at around 11 to 15% of any given election. Population proportion for Hispanics is 30%. So there's a lot of room for Hispanics to increase their election participation to match up with their demographic proportion in the state. And the other ethnicities typically are voting at their proportions. What's interesting about the Hispanic number is that a lot of the increase that we've seen with Hispanic voters are coming from 18 to 34-year-olds. That's a difference between almost every other ethnic group. As you can see on the let's see, is that the left-hand side? Yeah, the left-hand side, this represents the non-Hispanic voters, and the largest groups of voters in this are the 55 to 74-year-olds. That is pretty much a normal number that we see. A lot of time, older people are more predisposed to vote. They own property. They've been in a certain location for a long time. They've got roots to the community, so they end up voting at a higher rate than people who are younger than them that don't have those same roots. However, Hispanics, as you can see, that 18 to 34 is definitely much higher than the other age brackets for their group. Now, as those 18, 34-year-olds age into the next one, behaviorally, they should continue to vote, and that number should continue to increase as well. So what we might see over the next couple election cycles is, we have indications that there could be a situation where Hispanics do actually start to vote at 23, 24% of the electorate rather than at the 11 to 15%. Hispanics typically in polling data, as of right now, you see them kind of supporting Democrats to a factor about 70-30, 60-40 in that range. So if Hispanics do begin to participate at a 25, 28% rate, then that would certainly bode well for Democrats in this state as far as some of their chances for the presidential and other statewide elected offices. Quick background in Arizona. You probably already know this. Many of you do. I see. Arizona is a very, very heavy early ballot state. 80% of our ballots come in by mail. And what this chart is showing you is that it's just representing how big that block of early ballots are. So as you can see, there were more Republicans and Democrats that cast their vote by mail in this state than everybody who casts their vote on election day. That is an election day voter, mind you, not just because there's also a second category. As you can see, they're called late earlies. Those are the people that drop off their ballot at the polling place that are permanent early voters. So, but that election day, that only encompasses about 15 to 20% of the electorate. So most of our election is conducted and is, most of the ballots are in long before election day actually occurs. And another interesting phenomena about Arizona is that what we see is older Republican men are the most likely group to turn around their ballot as soon as they get it. So when we start to study the electorate as it comes in, the mean age of the electorate starts out at around 65. And it starts out around 46% female. So, this is it's usually very Republican at the time. I mean, even in this last election, where as we showed that party split where it was extremely narrow, when we started studying it at the very beginning of the election, it was 15% Republican at the time. So Republicans started out with a massive electoral advantage that continually narrowed as early ballots came in. What we have to look at that and say, okay, well, what can we infer from that? One of the things we can infer is that younger people engage later, and women engage later as well. In these two graphs, you see that as we got closer to election day, the mean age went from 64 to 58. So that's in terms of statistics, that's a pretty big drop. And also, women started at 46, as I said, and became the majority of the electorate by the end of the election. They were about 52% of the electorate at the time. So a couple things. When you take the census data and you kind of squeeze it in with the election results, certain patterns start to appear that really, again, go to why we are a battleground state. The more white a voting precinct, the more likely it was to support Republican candidates. Nationwide, that shouldn't come as a surprise. The precincts that had less than a college education were split up between Republicans and Democrat candidates. However, the interesting thing about this split was that it was not a split where these precincts were, voting at 49% Martha McSally, 52% Kyrsten Sinema. These were very hardcore on one side or the other. A lot of precincts that were lower education, lower income were upwards to 80% for both Sinema and McSally in their respective geographies. Rural precincts for Republicans and Central City, Phoenix, and Tucson for Democrats. So the middle class precincts, that is where the battleground will occur in Arizona. So these are typically inner and outer suburb ring precincts, extending from about the 101 all the way to the end of the county on both sides. So, and these are definitely hovering around the 50% range for both Republicans and Democrats. These are precincts that we saw, and I'll show you a little later, that Donald Trump, as he won some of these precincts, he lost some of these precincts, and then Kyrsten Sinema picked up some of these precincts in her election in 2018. So these were all precincts that are kind of at the tipping point. A lot of people there were willing to ticket split, and we've seen Republicans have some erosion in these precincts in 2018. The higher income precincts definitely did support Republicans in most cases. There was a small cluster of Democratic ones, usually closer to college campuses or areas like that strip of Central that's north of the 10 freeway. Central north, north of the 10 freeway, that have kind of redeveloped over time, and there's a lot of expensive condos there and stuff, and a lot of kind of wealthier people who enjoy the urban lifestyle has moved into those areas, and those areas were typically, significantly more Democratic than some of the other outer precincts, like Paradise Valley, of course, which was very Republican. So, and then one of the other interesting takeaways that I saw was that when I took all the majority Hispanic precincts, as the income rose in that precinct, the household income increased, the predilection to support Republican candidates also increased. That is just a pattern to watch out for in a long term. In certain areas where there might be considered Hispanic community, if it's a Hispanic community, if the income continues to increase, that might be areas in which Republicans will start picking up some support over time. And you can stop me for questions if you ever have any, by the way. I'm totally fine with that. Yes?
When you say the election, can you put that in perspective? Is it from 10% to 15%, 10% to 30%? What are you talking about?
So it was on, I don't have the graph on me, but it was on, it's on a scatter plot. The cluster just tended, if you looked at it, the gradient went up as the income went up. Now, it was like what you said. It's very close to. It's not situations in which Martha McSally began winning Hispanic majority precincts. They were just more there was more Republicans in those precincts or more people that supported Republicans. In most cases, I believe the entire cluster, except for maybe 2 precincts, were above water for, underwater for Martha McSally. So the majority of these precincts, even these Hispanic leading precincts, were still supporting Democrats. It's just that as their income went, they got closer to the 50% mark than the lower income precincts, which were closer to 60, 80, 90% for Kyrsten Sinema. And so this is what this is right here, is showing our congressional districts over the last, over the entirety of redistricting. And what you see is Republicans losing safe status in a lot of these. So when you looked at 2012, and I have, by the way, my safe lean swing is actually fairly conservative. I sign essentially it's a lean precinct in, like, say, a Larry Sabato would be like 7 points between the two. Mine is like 13 or 14 points. So it's pretty conservative to be considered a lean, because when you're winning an election by 10 points, most people would say that's a landslide. But for purposes of this, I kept it, I kept the categories very broad. So in the congressional districts in 2012, there were 4 safe Republican. In fact, there were 4 and then 1 safe D, which was 7. There was 1 lean D, which was, which one was it? It was, I want to say, it was 3. It was 3. Grijalva's district. And then the 3 swings were 1, 9, and 2. Okay? Now, one of the things, as we get closer to 2018, we see safe districts start, we see a lot of these safe districts starting to drop off. The swing districts are absolutely dropping off. In 2018, we had no swing districts. 9 was the only district to go from swing to lean to safe for the Democrats. The Republican districts all went from safe to lean, and the Democrat, and 7 stayed safe Democrat the entire time. Talk about the House legislative. Yes.
Yeah, how much of that would you say was a condition of the candidates? Like, for example, in District 8, for all intents and purposes, Debbie Lesko was a first-time candidate because they only won the election.
There is always, the candidates are always a function of whether it's considered a safe swing or lean district, always. So yes, I would say that, but that, especially when it's an open seat in that situation where Trent Franks resigned abruptly and there was a special election, that would definitely, change the makeup of a district, at least in the temporary, to going from like a safer district to a lean district. So yes, a candidate absolutely has a lot to do with that. But a lot of this, some of it is not candidate driven. I would argue that 9, at least initially, was not candidate driven. That is a demographic district in which demography has played a pretty crucial role in its moving from a swing district to a safe district. You've got a situation there in which it's a fully suburban area, a very mature suburban area at that. Not a lot of new building happening in 9, especially in the last 10 years. We have that area has become kind of a tech sector, so a lot of younger families moved in that were working for Intel or Intel, the area around Intel, so they were kind of the tech worker mindset, very highly educated area, and then of course Tempe's right there as well. So that district was always it has been demographically swinging for the Democrats for quite some time. So, and then the other districts that went from swing to swing and then to 0 were they're suburban districts. Where was I? Sorry, it's been a long day. So basically, the summary here is there's no swing districts right now. So obviously, we only have one more election with these districts, and then we're going to go through redistricting in 2022 is when we'll have the new districts. So the swing districts for the legislative seats, same sort of situation. We saw a lot of erosion for the Republicans here as well. The D seats were moving to the safe column since 2014. They've become more safe. And this especially has a lot to do with the candidates, because this was actually quite difficult to do because there were several situations in which there was no Senate Democrat candidate. And so, or a Senate Republican candidate. So there would be, one of the races of the three was a 100%. So, and sometimes you have to figure out how to, so I took whatever was the closest contest and put that up. So absolutely a candidate in this case was very important. But most of the districts, when they became swing districts in this situation, are absolutely were either previously lean Republican districts or they were absolutely in suburban areas. So, of the 4 swing districts we have right now, which are 10, 17, 28, and 6, 3 of those are suburban districts. 6 is somewhat more of a rural district. And the only reason it is a swing district is because it incorporates elements of Flagstaff. But there's been, even in the blue wave of 2018, that district didn't change that much from 2016 to 2018. It was only like the Democrats only increased by like a point in that district. So there was not a lot of change or fluctuation in that district. But the other ones, the suburban district, 17, no one even knew that one, that was sort of on a lean scale. We're like, okay, 17, that's a lean district. And then the Democrats won that district. So that was one that was somewhat more surprising than some of the others. 28 has always been a swing district. 18 used to be a swing district. It's no longer. 18 is, that's Ahwatukee. And that district went from being a swing district to pretty much a safe Democratic district at this point. And that doesn't even incorporate that much of Tempe, by the way. If you know the map, 18 stops at Elliott Road. So there's not a lot of university influence on 18. So it really shows that it's not, you can't just attribute it to, oh, it's a bunch of university kids that moved in. No, that's not necessarily true. Demographically, it did change. And then, of course, 28, which is right smack dab in the middle of central Phoenix, central northern Phoenix, where if you slice it in half of those are very wealthy Republican suburbs, and the other half are demographically shifting suburbs that tend to support Democrats. So 28 is, once again, most definitely going to be the most exciting state legislative race that we're going to be watching in 2020. So I'm going to talk really quick about this urban-rural divide and, of course, the suburbs, because the suburbs are such a big important point to why we are a battleground state. I've got 2 examples of 2 metro areas here, Chicago and Phoenix. Chicago is an example of a non-elastic urban border. So this is an area in which, and by the way, let me just talk about the methodologies in this map. These are zip codes. And the blue is a medium density zip code. So these are zip codes in which there are anywhere from 400 to 2,200 people per square mile. And anything above that, 2,200 people per square mile, gets fed into the red zip. It's hard to see in this one, but you'll see it better. It's a red color there that is right there in Chicago, the downtown Chicago area. And if you looked at a map that showed the city of Chicago's borders, they would pretty much follow along that red path of those zip codes. So Chicago is an example of a non-elastic city. A lot of the East Coast cities are non-elastic cities, whereas the West Coast, like us, Las Vegas, Houston, when I say West Coast, but the West, Las Vegas, all these bigger horizontally expanding cities are very non-elastic. The suburban counties, they're suburban zip codes that are inside the city border. They're all over the place. In fact, if you can see in the Phoenix one, downtown Phoenix, where we are right now, based on this methodology, is considered a suburban district, a zip code. Well, this obviously is not a suburban zip code, but it just shows how our development has kind of marked us as a specific type of city, as opposed to like Chicago or some of those cities. So now I'm going to focus in. This is Maricopa County. The other map we just showing, you see those red. Now you can really see where those denser zip codes are. What those yellow precincts are these are the precincts that Donald Trump won in 2016, and then Kyrsten Sinema won in 2018. This is essentially the only example of this in the entire state. There was one precinct in Tucson that did this, and then there was a couple smuttering of precincts in the north where this occurred. But these precincts are they're those precincts that are massive in area with about 100 people in them. So statistically, you can't use them as an example, because when something goes from 50 to 40 people to 40 to 50 people, it's like, okay, well, that's great, but that doesn't mean anything. All of these precincts are pretty heavily populated, and as you can see, they follow a very defined pattern. They are all within the 101 corridor. They follow down Scottsdale Road. You see that little, right up there at the top, that little kind of curved area right there? That's Westworld. That's an area that Democrats have never touched Westworld before. This is the first election in which Democrats actually went past Shea Boulevard in Scottsdale to win some precincts. So Kyrsten Sinema did that. None of the other Democrats really did. A couple did get a smuttering here and there, but really it was Kyrsten Sinema that broke through that area. And as you can see, there's another defined border on the East Valley right there. That's Gilbert Road. And as you can see, the Republicans support those suburban areas past Gilbert Road on the east side of Gilbert Road. They get very reliably Republican. So it's just a very interesting pattern as to what occurred and will this occur again in 2020? Okay, so now let's talk about some forecasting. So everyone is familiar with 538 and all of those forecasting that CNN does and New York Times. I actually like to use a young guy out of the University of Alabama named Jack Hursting. He doesn't do this as a job, he does this as a hobby, but he's very, very good at it. And what I like about his, especially this early in an election, is that his forecasts are based, they give more weight to fundamentals of the state than the polling, because at this point, the polling industry is sort of in flux, and I'm sure that they're going to increase their efficiency over time. Nationwide polling is, I mean, when you do nationwide polls, it's usually very good, but at the statewide level, some polling can get a little messy, and that has a lot to do with the way that people don't respond to phone calls anymore. I mean, that iOS thing, like the new iOS software that's basically going to block every single number that you don't know. I mean, that's going to have a big impact on polling. You have no idea, but that essentially it's like, oh, okay, if you have an iOS phone, we can't contact you anymore. And that's a problem. So now they have to resort to using online paneling, which have in some cases proven to be very good, and in some cases have proven to be very bad. It's a newer medium. People are getting very good at it, but it's still kind of in its nativity, and it's going to take a couple cycles for them to work out some of the kinks. So like I said, I like to work with fundamentals right now. So, and what we see in fundamentals is Donald Trump having a 54% chance of winning the state. Now, in probability, 50, that's essentially a coin flip. So we are within coin flip range right now. And then these are now when we're talking about the polling, this is why we're in coin flip. He does have some polling on here. As you can see, it's essentially 45-45, with a couple polls here and there. But and then you can see his weighting. Is it in this page? No, it's on the next page. Sorry about that. But this is why we are definitely a coin flip in this state right now. So this is our Senate projections right now, and it's very similar. It's 54% for Martha McSally, and this is all based on the fundamentals of this state. The vote percentage that he intends right now is what, 1.2 between the two.
Do you see Trump have to carry the state for McSally to win, or McSally win?
I mean, I think that. Sure. I mean, 2018 was a great example of that actually occurring. I mean, Doug Ducey did fantastic in a situation with Kyrsten Sinema carrying the state. So that is plausible. Now, one could make an argument that Martha McSally has tied her campaign more to Trump than Doug Ducey did. So, does that mean that she is more dependent upon Donald Trump's performance in this state than Doug Ducey was or would be? I would tend to think yes. A lot of times what you see is federal candidates and state candidates, there is a divergence. People, when they vote for federal candidates, are voting for a different slew of issues than for the most part they vote for state candidates. So, is Martha McSally more tied to Donald Trump? I would say fundamentally yes. Even no matter how she defines her campaign, she's going to be more tied to the president than, say, a Doug Ducey, who could basically run his own campaign, not mention the word Donald Trump, and be fine. And as you can see here at this very bottom, this is what I'm talking about. His weighting, he gives 50% weighting. Most of the weighting of his forecasting at this point is for fundamentals. And that should, as polling we get closer, that should start to shore up a little bit more and give more weight to polling when we get closer to the election. But this far out, it's better to keep fundamentals. Yes. Any incumbent who's in a 50-50 race is not happy about that. Okay, that's if you're an incumbent in 50-50 race, like where it's a coin flip, no, you're not. You can't be celebrating at 50-50, no matter what. So no matter what, this is good for a challenger. So I'm going to give you a summary here. I don't even know how far I am, and I don't have my phone. I left it back there. So could someone give me a time check? Thank you. What's that? Oh, dude, I got plenty of time. Okay. So Arizona is likely going to cast around 3 million votes in this next election. So that's based on voter registration, where we are right now. If voter registration increases in 2020, which it will, probably closer to 3.1, that is going to be a record amount of people that cast their ballot. I don't know if it's going to break the record turnout, which was in 1980. 2008 got pretty close to that at 78%. But we just don't know yet if it's going to break record turnout. But at 3.1 million people as of right now, that's a pretty phenomenal number for Arizona. And as of where we are right now, that's absolutely within bounds without making any sort of large statistical leaps. And the polling indicates that the Democratic presidential candidate is going to have a fairly sizable effect on Democratic performance in this state. We've seen polls here where Joe Biden will beat Donald Trump in the poll by 10 points. And then as you get further down the ticket, that starts to narrow pretty significantly. And then Donald Trump starts beating some of the lower tier Democratic candidates. So whoever the Democrats decide is their nominee is going to have a pretty substantial effect on the forecast for Arizona as we get closer. The urban-rural divide will probably continue to dominate this election. It has for all the special elections we've seen in the last year. It did for 2018. There's no reason to expect it not to be a factor in 2020. And in that situation, this is why it's going to be very important to these battleground precincts, these suburban precincts are going to make such an important factor in this election. Hispanic turnout will continue to be a wild card. So as we talked about, if Hispanic turnout starts to increase by exponential levels or significantly increase 5, 6, 7, 8 points, that bodes very well for the Democrat no matter what. But it's been a wild card for several years. As long as I've been covering elections in Arizona, Hispanic turnout has been a wild card. So, we really don't know where it's going to be yet, and it's a number to watch. And then the challenge, the hurdle for Republicans in this state, for the Republican challenger for Donald Trump and any of the Republicans are going to be the moderate suburban, I actually don't like the word moderate, let me back that up. The suburban independent / Republican women in those areas, as when you look at polling, that's the subgroup of people that really peeled off from Donald Trump and have consistently poll after poll after poll shown that they've peeled off from Donald Trump. So, for Republicans, their best course of action to try to shore up Arizona is to try to reappeal to these suburban women. Political spending in the state is going to be insane. We were at about 120 million in 2018. We're probably going to be around 250 million this next year. It's going to be ginormous. There's going to be so much political spending, 150 for the presidential and another 100 for the Senate race. So you're not going to be able to blink without seeing an ad somewhere. So that is all I have for the presentation. I can take any questions you have. Sir?
Donald Trump seems to have offended some of the Mormon folks. Do you think that's going to continue or change?
So religion is definitely the most difficult thing to quantify in politics because there is no hard data on religious preference. And especially not in terms of geography. So what I can say to that is that when we first looked at that first slide, and I talked about the, I'm going to it. Oh, I missed that slide. That's funny because I dropped that. I'll give it a second. When we looked at this first slide, you see that the Democrat, as I said, the Democrat Hillary Clinton only did about a point better than Barack Obama, but Donald Trump lost a significant amount, and a lot of that went to Evan McMullen. If you look at the canvass from 2016, there was about 107,000 votes that went to Evan McMullen, and he did do very, very, very well in Utah as well. So can you make an argument that there was a contingency of Mormon people that did not vote for Donald Trump? I believe that there is an argument to be made in that respect. Will that continue without a third-party candidate? I don't know. I don't know if they're going to stay home and just not vote, or if they're going to hold their nose and vote for Donald Trump or vote for the Democrat. It's very difficult to tell. I would love to be able to quantify religion, but there's just no way to do it.
In terms of the swing districts at the state legislative level, what would you put, because I noticed that it was not in the districts you mentioned, what would you put someplace like District 20, which is north,
Yes.
part of the north, so that would be more reliably Republican?
Yes. Yes. So yeah, 20 is definitely a lean Republican district, but it's on the Republican end of lean Republican. So, does 20, can 20 switch to the Democrats this next year? It's not implausible, but certainly there would have to be further erosion from that yellow line north in order for 20 to go into the hands of the Democrats, plus probably some very good candidates in that area as well. So is it implausible? No, it's absolutely not implausible. It's definitely a district to watch, but it's one of those things where the next year's voter registration is going to, when we get to that final, when we get closer to those final reports, when people have, said, okay, I'm going to be voting here, to watch where the growth is, if there's been a lot more Democratic growth in that area. And I presume there will, because I would presume that the Democrats will be targeting that northern area, because they know if they want to take the legislature, the state legislature, it's going to have to go through those areas. So, it's not implausible, but it is, as is everything in the law of large numbers, the last 5% is the hardest. It's easy to get to 90%. If you look at polling, if you want a 90% confidence interval and you're polling 1,000 people, you can get a 90% with like 200 people. 95%, which is the pretty common standard, that's like 600. But if you wanted to get 99, you'd have to interview 900 people. So essentially, you can't even do 1,000. So the sample size, if you want 99% confidence interval out of 3 million people, you're going to have to interview like 250,000 people. So it's hard to get to that last 5%. So the answer is maybe.
Not strictly about Arizona, but there have been polls, national polls, that have been divergent, but consistent. One poll left Joe Biden up 10, 15 points, and another one, I believe, was Warren up 2, 5, 7 points. Is there some fundamental difference between these polls making them?
Yeah, so when you're looking at polling, if you want to scrutinize polling, one of the first things you want to do is look at the methodology, and first look at how they did data collection. As I said, right now, data collection is one of the most important things with polling. A lot of the polling, like say, for example, there's a poll out there, I believe it's Emerson. Emerson is, they are relying on something called Amazon Turk for a lot of their data collection. And so what that does is that's causing them to collect a lot of college students, a lot of higher educated college students that use Amazon Turk. Because if you're not familiar with Amazon Turk, it's like a program where you can earn like a couple cents or something by completing a survey or doing some little small tasks. And so this Emerson is using Amazon Turk for this, but this is skewing their polling results. And so a lot of analysts are like, Emerson, what are you doing? You shouldn't be using Amazon Turk. You should, if you're going to do online paneling, you should be using one of the companies that are at least attempting to create scientific samples in order to put out their poll. Like Gallup actually has moved a lot of their stuff to online sampling, but they use a scientific polling, a paneling company that puts it together. And so, yes, the first thing you look at is data collection. And the second thing is once you figure out if it was a robocalling poll, if it was a live caller poll, if it was an online panel poll, the next thing you look at is the demographics. You kind of know what the demographics should look like for the Democratic Party. So, in some cases, if there's huge divergence between the two, sometimes that can be chalked up to just having more college kids taking it than 65-year-old Democrats that are more, apt to vote for Joe Biden. So, there is definitely divergence. The hard thing is to know who's going to be right in the end, because that's the thing with polling is you can look at it and you say, that's a terrible poll. It's like, well, really, is it? We don't know if it's a terrible poll yet, because we only know if it's a terrible poll now, obviously, there's some situations where, like if you're polling Arizona and, someone puts out a poll of Arizona and says, oh, Donald Trump is losing by 10 points. And you look at the party split in their methodology, and it's 5 to 7% more Democrats than surveyed than Republicans. Well, there's no situation that's going to happen in which there are more Democrats that vote for Republicans in 2020. Or excuse me, more Democrats than Republicans vote. That might happen across, at some point in the near or far future, but it's not going to happen in 2020. The best Democrats can probably hope for is a split with Republicans of about 4.5, 5 points. So you just got to check the demographics, check the data collection, and then kind of, make up your own mind if that makes sense as a survey that matches the demographics that they should be looking at. And you can use, there's this great site. There's a great site called Census Reporter. Okay, this is my favorite site to go to look up demographics, because it is so easy to use. It's censusreporter.org. You type in whatever you're looking at, you type in a state, and it will come out with like several different just give the major demographic points of every of the state. It'll give your household income, it'll give what the makeup for the age should be, and all these other great things, so that when you're looking at a poll, you can immediately have what the census says it should technically be. So when you're looking at it, you're like, oh, this poll sampled too many not Republicans, because the census doesn't look at that, but this poll sampled too many college-educated people. Because maybe it's like, oh, this was 40% college educated. But you look at the Census Reporter and it says only 10% of the state or so has a college education. I'm making up these numbers, of course, but those are the kind of things you can look at using Census Reporter.
I was just going to ask you if regarding your answer to him, whether like 538 or the guy that you mentioned before, whether looking at how they weight the poll is a good way of looking.
Yes, I'm a big fan of the way 538 weights its polls. I think that's a smart way of doing it. So the original poll aggregator was Real Clear Politics, and they would just take an average of the polls. And 538 took that a step further and said, no, we're going to give this a weighted average. And I actually believe that that's the best way of going, because they take these pollsters and they reevaluate them on a regular basis, so they know where their means are and what their methodologies are, and so that they weigh them against each other too. So like when an election happens, okay, this poll it got the closest. So what did they do? Did they use an online panel? Did they use this? And then they re-update all their polling companies based on what they report to them. And then for some of the other for some other polls that don't report to 538, they give them very little weighting. They say, okay, well, there was a poll conducted. We got to give it something. So we're going to put it in here, but we're going to not assign it too much weight because, it's not, say, like a Marquette or Quinnipiac, which, has a very established reputation. Anyone else? Okay. Oh, marijuana will most likely be there. I would presume that this year marijuana will probably make it back on the ballot. I would presume. I have seen polling to indicate that this might be the year that if they can get it on the ballot, that it will likely pass. I think it's got its best chance in ever this year of passing, if it's a reflection of the Las Vegas and the California law.
Is there any way to measure voter suppression?
So what I would say, to statistically measure voter suppression, you basically, you have to see what what places were you take, say, for example, if I were to have to measure voter suppression or try to find voter suppression, I would look at the precincts over time and what their typical voting percentage would be in a certain election, and then see if there was a significant drop in participation in a specific precinct. And so as of someone who does this, you have to weigh out everything but voter suppression first, okay? You can't go immediately to voter suppression. So, like why? Why would it, and honestly, I haven't really seen anything that would indicate that there's been any sort of specific targeted areas for voter suppression. Yeah, I haven't seen it. Now, you can make political arguments about state statute, and if certain things that the state does are considered voter suppression, that's an argument that me as a statistician, I'm not going to make, but that would be, say, for example, if you believe that certain state laws are quote unquote are voter suppression, that would affect everything technically. So like, if it was and you strike the law, then the entire number would increase. So it's hard to know, but there are ways of detecting it. And you're looking at me like. So I hope was that okay? Was that an okay explanation? You work for, okay, as you work for, yeah, okay, good. All right, good. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Oh, okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you listening to me.